You know, a lot of great movies have great A-list celebrities listed as the title role. As long as it says, something like with Tom Cruise, you know you're going to make a lot of money at the box office. But if you want your movie to last longer than just through the first couple rounds, if you want it to be the kind of thing that people will talk about for years to come, what you need is a good supporting cast. Sometimes it's those names that don't immediately come to mind. But every time they show up at just the right scene that brings a turning point in the movie, you say, I remember that guy. I know who that person is. They seem to always show up at the right time. Some of them end up becoming A-list actors. I think of some movies where Amy Adams or Mark Ruffalo or Samuel L. Jackson or Robert Duvall provide this moment in the movie. Not the lead role. But if they weren't in the movie just wouldn't be what it is. The very first Mr. Supporting Actor was Carl Malden. 1936, Hollywood decided to give an award for this kind of role. Carl Malden wins it, and not just that, it's not just the first one, he wins it 3 more times over the next 5 years, holding the record for Best Supporting Actor wins. The Bible says that in our church, there is an incredible supporting cast. I know there are certain names that come to your mind. It may be the elders who serve in a congregation. It may be the person who helped build the building whose family becomes a legacy family in that congregation. There are names that rise to the top. But in any congregation, the truth is this: there is one main headliner whose name is Jesus Christ. And then all the rest of us are the supporting cast. But it turns out the roles we play are extremely important. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 12, beginning in verse 12, just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. For in one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and all were made to drink of one Spirit. For the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I don't belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as he chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, yet one body. Now, it's easy to talk about supporting cast because they win awards. But did you know there's a role even lower on the totem pole than supporting cast? We call that the bit players. And there are people in Hollywood who just wait for the opportunity for their agent, if they can afford an agent, to send them a bit part. A bit part, by definition, is a 5 or less. That's what they sometimes call it. It means you have no connection with the main characters and you have 5 lines of dialogue or less. It's a bit part. How can you shine in a bit part? Well, Paul says, much in every way. Look in verse 21. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. The parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. I want to tell you about my favorite bit part person. A man by the name of Dabs Greer. You probably don't remember the name. If you ever watched Little House on the Prairie, the preacher who ran that walnut Grove Church. That's Dabbs Greer. If you watch Gunsmoke, he was a storekeeper, Mr. Janus, for a while. But those were the biggest parts he ever got. Over 100 movies, over 600 TV episodes, Dabbs Greer was a bit player. But when he showed up, he showed up. In the pilot episode of The Brady Bunch, Mike and Carol Brady get married, and the preacher who marries them is Dabbs Greer. In the pilot episode of Superman, the Man of Steel has to rescue somebody to put him in his arms for that iconic image of him carrying somebody away. And who is it? Dabbs Greer. He spends his whole life playing bit parts like that. How do you keep yourself going, wondering, when will I ever make it? He doesn't think that way. Because when he was interviewed at 90, he had the best line. Dabbs Greer said, "Every character in their own little sphere is the lead." Isn't that great? I can think of a number of people in my life who I suppose the history books would call bit player. But in that own little sphere, when that intersected with my life, they were the lead. Who was your third grade Sunday school teacher? I bet you won't find her name in the Encyclopedia Britannica. But I promise you, that person made a difference in your life. And for that year on Sundays, she was the lead. You know, it's very easy to look up the picture for any CEO of any major corporation in America. But when your machine doesn't work, the only voice that matters is the help desk person on the other end of that line. And how they handle that call in that moment represents the entire corporation to you. That 5-minute phone call, they are the CEO of the company in your life. Many of you have undergone invasive surgery. You probably remember the name of your doctor. But what about the cadre of nurses who are watching over, who now know you or parts of you better than you know yourself? Who was that person who handed the right tool at the right time to the doctor? And if they hadn't, your story would be, let's just say, different than it is now. I don't know the name of the American Airlines pilot I had a few weeks ago. They announced, but I wasn't paying attention. But I'm grateful for him. I'm also grateful for the baggage handler who put the right bag on the right plane. There are moments in our lives when we come in contact with others, nameless, faceless, but they play a role that ends up being so very important, and we only recognize it when things don't quite go right. We all know the name of great generals, but the unknown private who stands guard over the general's tent when everybody's asleep at 3 a.m., he's the lead. And I think some of us are going to have lives that will become well known. There will be some people in this world who will live lives, you might say, of renown. But I promise you that won't be enough unless renown gives way to significance. And that leads to the first of two questions I want to ask you that I got from a book by Chuck Swindoll. Would you rather be a person of renown or a person of significance? In 2002, a movie came out kind of like Dead Poets Society, but at a lower level, called The Emperor's Club. Kevin Kline plays the role of William Hundert. He's a classics teacher at this prep school for kids. First day of class, he calls on a new student and says, why don't you go to the back, and I want you to read the plaque on the back wall. This boy looks up at the plaque and he tries to get the words out. He reads, I am Shutruk Nahunte, king of Ansam and Susa, sovereign of the land of Elam. I destroyed Sippar and took the stela of Haram Sin and brought it back to Elam, where I erected it as an offering to my God. Shutruk Nahunte, 1158 BC. Is anyone familiar with this guy? He says. And there's just a pregnant pause. Come on, says William Hundert. This is Shutruk Nahunte, sovereign of the land of Elam, destroyer of Sippar. Behold, his accomplishments are not recorded in any history book. Why do you think that is? The boys just look up, stare and wonder. Because, says Mr. Hundert, great ambition and conquest without contribution is without significance. The students just breathe and take it all in. History is littered with people who came to power and got their 15 minutes of fame, but who made no difference that would make their time on this earth worth sharing, because they divested others, but invested in no one but themselves. Oh, there are people like that. And then there are people of significance, which is usually not defined by how renowned they were outside of their own little sphere. You know, as the older you get, the more you look back on your life and you begin to appreciate the people in your life. The Apostle Paul, as he was getting older, he would write letters in prison, in jail cells, and when he wanted to list and name people that were significant, what names came to mind? In the letter to the Colossians, Paul's sitting there and he's thinking of people to name, and he names Aristarchus, his cellmate. He names Luke, his doctor. And then he names somebody who only gets mentioned in 2 verses. 2 glorious verses that offer a description of a man that will become his legacy until the Lord returns, and perhaps even longer than that. Of all the things that you do regularly, what would you want to be recorded to define you for eternity? This one's pretty good. The man's name is Epaphras. And Paul says, I want to tell you about someone, and I want this to be read in churches, and for the next several thousand years, he's going to be remembered for this one thing. Epaphras is always wrestling in prayer for you, struggling on your behalf in his prayers. There it is. What he considered to be his private time with God now becomes his byline for all eternity. Prayer warrior Epaphras. There's an Old Testament story like this. King David. King David, in 2 Samuel chapter 23, verse 1, is coming to the end of his life, and the text says, these are the last words of King David. Whew. What is he going to talk about? King David, you remember, chosen as just a shepherd boy. He kills Goliath. But the greater and greater he gets, the more and more jealous Saul gets, and he ends up being on the run. You may remember 1 Samuel 22. David is stuck in a cave. But the people know who he is. And the text says, everyone who was dispossessed, everyone who had lost something, those who had nothing left to live for, came to David, and he became king over them. David reigns from the age 30 to the age 70. And he is surrounded by people who love him, who he helps train. 400 men come out to him, and he makes them into an incredible group of warriors. He shows them how to do it. Men who had nothing left to live for now have someone to serve, something to long for, to make David's kingdom glorious. Oh, they do. And you probably remember the name of some of David's great warriors. You probably know of Joab, who was his right-hand man, his secretary of war. But guess who doesn't get mentioned in David's last words? Not Joab. No, David begins to recount the significant people in his life and the significant stories he encountered. And it's the nobodies who became somebodies because of David. You get it in 2 Samuel 23. You get it in 1 Chronicles 11. You get some people who are named because what they do by themselves would definitely count as people of renown. But I promise you their story would be no different than Shadrach Nahunte if it wasn't for the fact that what they did was significant. The first of David's captain of captains listed is a man with a very hard to pronounce name, and so we'll use his nickname, Adino. Adino, the text says, killed 800 men at once. Have you done the math on that? I suppose if I had an automatic, if I had a machine gun and they didn't, it would still be hard. 800 men running at you. He didn't have that. He had a sword. And so did they. 800 men at once? Then there's Eleazar. Eleazar stood his ground and wouldn't budge, and he fought and fought and fought until he was so tired, the text says he couldn't get his fingers to let go of the sword, and his friends had to come and pry it out of his hands. There's another of his men. Remember, over 400 he's talking about. There's 30 who make a band of brothers, and there's 3 who make the mighty men. But among that band of brothers, there's Benaiah. One of the greatest lines in all the Bible, if you were going to talk about sort of a hero story and wanted to make some sort of movie about it, how about this line? He killed a lion in a pit on a snowy day. A great line. Can you picture that? He didn't just kill that, he also killed a 7.5 foot tall Egyptian with a shepherd's staff. Incredible contribution. But they get listed because it was all in the service of something greater than themselves. It wasn't so that they could make a plaque to say, look what I did. It was so they could point to the one who mattered most in their lives. And to David, it meant on that day and in that moment, they were the lead. It's why David can remember a story as he's recounting his final words, where he's stuck in a cave and his hometown of Bethlehem is overtaken by the Philistines. And he says, oh, I wish I could get a drink of water from the well that's by the gate. There is no chance that there was no water nearby where they were. They wouldn't be living. There was water near the cave. He wasn't thirsty. He was homesick. And it wasn't even a command. It was just an overheard wish. And his 3 mighty men say, We'll take care of it. And they bust through the enemy line. Can you picture this? 3 men with swords fighting their way through the garrison. We know from other places, because Jonathan did this, there were garrisons of 20 men set up every few rows. So you got to get through the garrison of 20 men and then uphill to the gate, break through the gate, and now you only got 2 fighting while the third one grabs the cup for the water. Okay, you guys take care of the rest of them. I'm busy. Fills it with water. And now they got the water and they got their sword and they fight their way back. They give the water to David. And I know the first time you read it, it's a little weird. David looks at it and pours it on the ground. I'm not sure that I would want to do that in front of 3 men with swords who just risked their lives. But you got to understand the culture. This was not an act of saying, I don't care about what you did. This is an act of saying, I am not worthy to drink this because of what you did. David is recounting in his life people of incredible significance because they used their skills and resources to better his life. And he couldn't forget. There are stories not just of renown, but of significance because their acts of heroism are for something. Remember that line from Dabbs Greer? Every character in their own little sphere is the lead. And I want you to know that what you're doing for others will be remembered. I know that there are people with short memories, but the people you're serving are not the only ones who are watching. In Hebrews chapter 6 and verse 10, the Bible says, God is not unjust to forget your work and labor of love that you've shown towards his name. And that leads to the second question for this morning. Which matters more to you? The size of your world or the depth of your impact upon it? A few years ago, they came out with a remake of the movie Miracle on 34th Street. It's okay, but the original is phenomenal. You remember the one made in the 40s. Miracle on 34th Street, there's a man who calls himself Kris Kringle. And he is convinced and tries to convince others he is Santa Claus. Can you imagine such people? I love this movie. We come to the end of the movie, and the judge who's supposed to be trying this case is up for re-election. And the question is, what is he going to do? And he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know either way he goes with this decision. He might be in trouble. And then the bit actor who only has one scene, less than 5 lines, provides the turning point in the movie. He's in the basement of the post office. He's sorting mail. And a letter comes addressed to Kris Kringle. And he looks at the bags of mail waiting to go to Santa Claus, and he reads about the story of a man in a courthouse who claims to go by that name. And he gets the idea. Let's send the mail to him. The next thing you know, bags and bags of mail land on the judge's desk, addressed to Kris Kringle, and the address is the courthouse, and it gives the judge the line he's looking for. He says, if the federal government considers you to be Kris Kringle, who am I to deny it? I think there are moments in our lives, and there are moments in Scripture, where somebody shows up that had no idea at the beginning of that day that their contribution was going to make the difference in the story. So much larger than themselves. It makes me think of a boy who had 5 loaves and 2 fish and just happened to be in the right place at the right time. It makes me think of that donkey who's carrying Balaam, who in a miracle moment is divinely given a bit part with some important lines. The unknown and unnamed man carrying a pitcher of water who leads Peter and John to the upper room. The widow who doesn't realize anybody's watching as she puts in her 2 last coins in the sight of Jesus. All unnamed become object lessons for time immemorial. We are trained to think that the most important people are the ones out in front, the ones who stand out, the ones whose name appear in the lead. But that's not true. It's almost never true. Scripture goes out of its way to tell us that from the very beginning, God's chosen the lesser, the minor, the second-born, the outcast, the outsider to be the chosen one. And even the chosen one needs help all around. And when God shows up, it's rarely in the earthquake or in the fire, but much more often in the still small voice. And that's why everybody matters. Konstantin Stanislavski said, "There are no small parts, only small actors." So let me ask you, what role has God given you? Are you trying to be a person of renown or a person of significance? Are you more concerned about the size of your world, or are you focusing on the depth of your impact in it? For when you stand at the door to open it for those who are hurting, when you raise those kids in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, when you stock the shelves with joy in your heart, when you offer that kind word to a neighbor when they need it, you never know that your contribution just might be the turning point in someone's story. Would you rather be a person of renown or a person of significance? What's more important, the size of your world or the quality of your impact on it? The story is told of an old man who went out to the ocean. All these starfish, thousands of starfish had washed up on shore and were needing to be thrown back in to survive. He picked one up. He looked at it and he threw it back in the ocean. As he went to pick up another one, a little boy saw him doing it and said, "Sir, what do you think you're doing? There are thousands of starfish. You couldn't possibly throw them all back in. What does it matter?" And that old man picked up a starfish, looked at it, looked at the boy and said, "It matters to this one. God's placed you somewhere. Every character in their own little sphere is the lead. Will you play your part?" One of my favorite true stories involves a man named Stanley Shipp. Stanley Shipp was a very tall man who loved to tell people about Jesus. When he would go skiing, he would tell his family, "I want to go on this ski lift by myself, and you guys come later because I'm going to sit next to somebody and I get a chance to tell them about Jesus." Talk about a captive audience. So he's on the ski lift and this young woman sitting next to him. And he says, "Where are you from?" She says, "Oh, I'm from Northwest Seattle." So, "Oh, Seattle. Hey, I got a friend in Seattle named Milton. You really should look him up when you go back. His name is Milton Jones. He's got something you need to know." That's all he said. Got off the ski lift, went away. That woman went home. One day, her coworker invited her to go to church. She said, "No, thank you." 2 weeks later, he invited her to go to church. She said, no, thank you. 2 weeks later, he invited her to go to church. She said, no, thank you. She gets on a bus to go home on a Wednesday night. And on the way home, she sees a advertisement in the bus for a church service. And she says, maybe God's trying to tell me something. Okay, I'm going to go to this church on the advertisement. She goes to the church on the advertisement, and guess who's there? Her coworker. Couldn't believe it. The preacher is a man named Milton. She goes up to him and she says, your name isn't Milton Jones, is it? Yes, it is. Do you know a tall man named Stanley who skis? I do. She says, all I know is that he tells me you've got something I need to know. And he said, boy, do I ever. It's pretty fun to live like this. Instead of trying to think how to make everyone into everything you've ever want them to be, just play your role and watch as the divine director turns our bit parts into a work of beauty.
Thank you for joining us. I hope you've been encouraged. I hope you've been enriched. And if you have any questions, any thoughts, any comments, reach out to us at prayers@wschurch.net. God bless you. Tune in next week.